The Lost NFL Trophy. Akron, Ohio. Here you see a precious 100-year-old trophy. It is made of sterling silver, lovingly created for a team championship, and first presented at a prominent gathering inside an Old World hotel. Shaped like a cup, the award has handles, which made it easy for the gleeful recipients to hoist it overhead. Their achievement? Winning the first NFL championship in 1920. The trophy has been missing ever since. Its whereabouts have been unknown since it was handed to the Akron Pros in 1920. Largely forgotten, the Brunswick Bulky Colander Cup is the holy grail of American sports memorabilia. It could be in someone's attic or chock full of pencils on a schoolkid's desk. At this point, the chances are not very good that anyone will ever find it. Joe Horrigan, the former longtime executive director of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, said in an interview, "It sounded like a challenge. And so began the mission to solve this whodunit, this where is it, a quest that hinged on finding that person who, when shown the only existing, shadowy photo of the trophy, would say, 'I've seen that. My mother uses it as a doorstop.'" It was a journey that meant knocking on doors, poring over library collections, tracking down interview subjects in 12 states, and spending at least one dusty afternoon searching behind the drywall of several abandoned Ohio buildings. But first, a few facts. The NFL has no idea where the Brunswick Bulky Colander Cup is. The archives of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, contain the original, typewritten minutes of league meetings that authenticate the existence of the cup, named for the early 20th century sporting goods company that donated it. But the trail goes cold by 1921. The one known picture of the trophy, published in newspapers at the time, is grainy. As far as anyone can tell, the trophy was formally bestowed upon the 1920 champions, who were supposed to hand it over to the next year's winners. Except there is no record of that happening. Which means the last place the trophy was seen was in Akron, and that is unquestionably where the search had to begin. A place of honor in Akron. In 1920, Akron was a city whose fast growth had been spurred by the demand for rubber tires during World War I. Goodyear and Goodrich operated 24 hours a day and filled boarding houses with laborers who rented beds in 8-hour shifts to match the schedules of the factories, whose smokestacks cloaked the city's wide boulevards with smoke and ash. It was a grubby city, a wide-open town with lots of bars, taverns and gambling. David Liebeth, a former president of the local historical society, said of Akron, which is 40 miles south of Cleveland, "Pro football at its dawning was no less rough around the edges, and it was roundly dismissed as a poor substitute for college football." But on September 17, 1920, the Akron businessmen Frank Need and Arthur Ranney, the owners of the Akron Pros, traveled 23 miles south to Canton, where they convened with coaches and managers in an automobile dealership to form the American Professional Football Association with other pro teams representing industrial centers. 2 years later, the group became the National Football League, which has come to recognize the 1920 season as its first. At the meeting, the owners voted to thank the Brunswick Bulky Colander Company for presenting the league with, as the meeting minutes called it, a loving cup that would go to the association's champion every year. According to newspaper accounts, throughout the inaugural season, the cup had a place of honor in the meeting site, the auto dealership owned by Ralph Hay, who also owned the APFA's Canton Bulldogs. Carl Hay Jr., whose father, Carl Sr., was a partner in the dealership with his cousin Ralph, snickered when asked if he had ever heard about or seen the trophy. "All I remember is that my dad, who was the company bean counter, considered the football team a waste of money." Hay, 91, said in his living room in an Akron suburb in November. Maybe he was right, because the whole operation went bankrupt in 1929. Asked if his father kept any mementos of his time linked to the genesis of the NFL, like, say, a silver loving cup trophy, Hay laughed loudly. "Not a chance. All that was passed down to me was a box of dealership stationery and an old blanket used by Jim Thorpe, the star of the Canton team," Hay said. When the 1920 season began, the Akron Pros played as if they could not wait to get their hands on the cup, compiling an undefeated season and an 8-0-3 record. The league champions, however, had to wait to get their trophy until the team owners reunited on April 30th, 1921, at the Portage Hotel, a stately building at the nexus of Akron's downtown district. As soon as the meeting began, Need and Ranny were presented with the Brunswick Bulky Colander Cup. Ranny, who as the league secretary recorded the minutes of the meeting, made no mention of what happened next. Perhaps, in that moment, he was too busy running around the room in joyous celebration, a hand wrapped around one handle of the trophy as an exultant Need clung to the other. We will never know. After more league business, Ranny noted that the group adjourned to have dinner at the hotel. While Prohibition was enacted months earlier, it was still common for dining establishments, especially in hotels, to make accommodations for guests to furtively enjoy alcoholic libations. Could Need and Ranny have toasted their 1920 championship with the other team owners, who were happily fading the inaugural season, and in all that revelry, could somebody have accidentally left the trophy behind? Because 99 years later, the minutes of the meeting on the night of April 30th, 1921, contain the last documented mention of its whereabouts. I suspect he stuffed it in an attic and then one day threw it out. Doesn't it make more sense that the trophy ended up in my grandfather's cigar store, where athletes hung out and there was a separate room just for gambling? Rick Ormsby, Need's grandson, said from his home on a quiet street in Medina, Ohio, 25 miles northwest of Akron. That place was the perfect spot to show off a trophy. The gambling room was very popular. Okay, now we were getting somewhere. Need was a noted Akron sportsman with ownership interests in boxing, minor league baseball, football, and horse racing. In addition to the gambling parlor, which was legal, his cigar store had a long wooden bar and blackboards used by clerks to regularly update the scores of Major League Baseball games. Jeff Maudlin, another of Need's 5 grandchildren, who lives in Lake Forest, Illinois, inherited pictures of the cigar store interior. Alas, the Brunswick Bulky Colander Cup is not front and center, or in the background, of any of those pictures. Maudlin also inherited a football-shaped gold fob, a popular jewelry item in the 1920s that would have attached to a watch chain, which was awarded to each of the 1920 Akron pros and owners. But I've never heard anything about a championship trophy, said Maudlin, whose mother was the sister of Ormsby's mother. My grandfather was around, we saw him. It never came up. Need died in Florida in 1969. He was 75. Suffice to say, neither Maudlin nor Ormsby has the trophy. Ormsby even double-checked every last dresser drawer and old trunk in his house, rummaging through anything passed down from his mother or grandparents. I wish I found it, Ormsby later said. Wouldn't it be cool to have that turn up 100 years later in an old box in my basement? Yes, very cool. So the Nade descendants did not have the trophy. That still left Need's partner, Art Ranny. Ranny, who played football at the University of Akron, stayed involved with Need until their football team began to falter on the field and at the gate in the mid-1920s, when the duo gave up their NFL franchise. Ranny became a county engineer and a leader in local Democratic Party circles. He retired to Florida, where he died in 1970. One December morning, a ray of hope in the hunt for football's holy grail arrived in texts from some of Ranny's 4 grandchildren, who admitted they were well versed in the legend of the lost trophy, which they had first heard about in the 1960s. They said it was family lore that Ranny might have had the cup decades after the 1920 championship. But everybody also knew that Grandpa Ranny was not a sentimental guy. Arthur Ranny, who lives in Platteville, Wisconsin, said of his namesake in an interview, I suspect he stuffed it in an attic and then one day threw it out. Or someone got it in a yard sale. Another grandchild, Elaine Roy of Lakeside Park, Kentucky, had a different theory. The trophy was talked about by our parents, but who knows, our grandfather might have hawked it, said Roy, who has scores of newspaper articles and other keepsakes related to her grandfather, including diaries.